Hey guys, Comic Boom here to address the question, has DC abandoned the light? What happened to the promise of rebirth? Now, there is no denying that DC has been very successful with its comic book publications lately. They've come out with some really good stuff. And I think it's quite obvious why DC has abandoned the light. And that's because darkness simply sells more comic books. Let's look at what's worked for DC. If you just look in the last year, DC has had some big successes with Batman White Knight by Sean Gordon Murphy. It's a very kind of a darker alternate universe Batman dystopian tale, but it worked very well, where sort of Joker becomes the good guy for a while, and that had a darker theme to it. You had Nightwing New Order. Nightwing New Order was also critically acclaimed, about, again, an alternate dystopian future where Dick Grayson Nightwing is basically helped eradicate the world of the metagene and metahumans. And that was a dystopian tale and a darker tale. We've got Mr. Miracle that's been very popular, which is basically the big theory going is that Mr. Miracle is in a constant state of depression. He's infected with the anti-life. And the very first issue started with him with Scott Free trying to commit suicide. So we have this ridiculously commercially successful Tom King written tale that is basically about suicide and anti-life. So we got darkness there, and it's selling a lot of comic books. We have even at the other success of Tom King, Batman Annual 2. Batman Annual 2 was on the surface a love story between Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle, but it ended with Batman dying, with Bruce Wayne losing his mind, getting Alzheimer's, getting dementia. So it was kind of a dark and gloomy tale, albeit a love story, but one which had a kind of a tragic, darker tone element to it, I think. And then, of course, we have to look at DC Metal, Scott Snyder's big event, Metal. It dealt with all those different types of Batman, Batman himself is a darker sort of origin tale, a tragic hero, motivated by the death of his parents. And what if Batman was further corrupted and became a Flash? What would, in another world, or Batman was further corrupted and became a cyborg type character or an Aquaman type character, and you had all those different metal characters that came out of Metal, and as in addition to, of course, the Batman Who Laughs, very dark tale, and this the whole idea that Batman is the key to unlocking the ultimate evil, Barbados, from a darker universe. And this darker universe infecting our universe after the breakdown of the Source Wall, which is how basically Metal ended. And then you got all these, you got, what was it? I think it was 9 different metals, only 4 or 5 of which we know about, and 3 are still a mystery, or 4 are still a mystery. You get Promethium, and Batmanium, and Amazonian, and Nth Metal, and I'm missing some metals there, and they all do different things, and everything they do seems to be dark things and cruel things and with mind control, and there's mystery, and so not only is there darkness there, it's like a dark cloud, and it's creating some confusion, but it's creating mystery, but it also seems to be creating a lot of intrigue and its interest in a lot of readers. So it does seem to be selling comic books. Now, it's also very interesting that while all these darker elements and these darker stories, which are very successful being sold by DC in the last year, we also had probably the most prominent successful light story or bright hopeful comic book was Super Sons. Everybody loves Super Sons, but it's canceled. It was canceled. They canceled Super Sons. Why? Because Bendis was coming over from Marvel. And what does Bendis do when he gets on the Man of Steel? He exterminates all the inhabitants of Kandor, the Bottle City. Rogol Zar is a world killer, a world destroyer who destroyed Krypton. And Batman and Lois Lane, and Lois Lane takes off, leaves Clark Kent, leaves Jonathan. Lois and Jonathan leave into space and leave Clark Kent, Kal-El all alone on Earth. Now, it started off with sort of a very darker, depressing element in Man of Steel. Again, I don't mean to put down Bendis' Superman. I think it's actually has a lot of potential, and I think it's going somewhere. But again, it seems like the titles that were really bright, DC canceled and got rid of, and they're moving toward a darker tone. And even though Super Sons is returning for a 12-issue maxi series, it's going to be a story that takes place before Bendis' run. So I say it's interesting to note again that in terms of stories that are in current continuity, there's still a lot of depression going around. And let's not forget that the big event that DC is leading into in all its titles, out of the pages of Batman with that Booster Gold arc, and out of the pages of the recent Flash War, Wally West is going to enter the Sanctuary. What is the Sanctuary? That's where superheroes go to basically heal from all their psychological wounds, their physical and their psychological wounds, and their PTSD that they get from engaging in constant battle and facing death on an almost daily or weekly basis. That's what Sanctuary is. Sanctuary, the premise of Sanctuary, the Tom King tale, the next big crisis, that about heroes in crisis, that's what it's called. It's basically about, it's based on Wonder Woman's compassion, and Batman uses his fortunes and his wealth to create Sanctuary. It's premised upon Wonder Woman's compassion to heal and help people, including some of their enemies, to heal from all the psychological scars that battles can ensue. Again, it's a darker, more real theme here, and it does seem to be something that really seems to be taking root in the DC universe. And we can go across the board here in the darkness. Not only did DC change all its mainstream titles to a very darker take, but also they created the new age for heroes, which was premised right out of the pages of Metal. So not only do we have the mainstream titles of the DC universe all going dark, but they doubled down on the darkness, and even on their new concept characters, like the Terrifics, like the Immortals, like the Silencer, all darker takes. The Terrifics could arguably be seen as a darker take on the Fantastic Four, and the Silencer is a new character who's a hit woman, again, who's sort of dragged from her idyllic life back into a life of being an assassin. Again, a dark tale. The new challengers of the unknown. Again, darker takes on all these things. And again, it's just interesting. The new age for heroes is failing. So it's interesting that DC, I think, is doubling down on putting darkness into their mainstream DC universe, because their new age of heroes, creating darkness for new characters, doesn't seem to be working well for DC, but for whatever reason, fans are responding to more darkness for their mainstream line of heroes, and I think that's very prevalent. More examples of darkness going on throughout the whole of the DC universe. Wonder Woman just got out of an adventure of the Dark Gods. When at the end of Metal, when all of the heroes of the Justice League were wearing the 10th metal armor, they all made wishes. And Wonder Woman's wish was to get the Greek gods back, but the metal screwed up the wish, and instead of the Greek gods coming back, the Dark Gods infected our universe, and Wonder Woman had an adventure with them, and ultimately losing her brother Jason into their sort of consciousness. And that's in the pages of Wonder Woman that ended in issue 50. We just found out this week in the pages of Aquaman that Aquaman's wish was that he wished that he could live on sea and land, and as a consequence of that, Atlantis has now risen out of the sea. So Aquaman's wish at the end of Metal was for Atlantis to rise, and it's risen. And that's probably going to lead to more chaos and probably a darker themed stories in the future as well. Again, these can lead to exciting stories just with darker themes, and I think that's very interesting. You look in the pages of Hawkman. Hawkman, of course, came out of the pages of Metal spectacularly, and what's happening in the pages of Hawkman? It's doom and gloom. He's been reincarnated in different places all over the galaxy, in time and space, and in all his reincarnations, in all his past lives, he's had visions of a dark force coming that will eventually invade and destroy him and the world. Again, so sounds very cliche. There's very, very common themes here throughout all the titles. In the pages of Green Lantern, the power battery has been infected now. So now the power battery seems to be giving crazy, screwed up commands to the various members of the Green Lantern Corps, and it seems to be corrupted. And so something's going on with the Green Lantern Corps. John Stewart, Green Lantern, in the pages of Justice League, has been infected by the Ultraviolet Corps, and the new Ultraviolet Corps is basically, it's sort of like the Dark Universe version of the Green Lanterns. The Ultraviolet Corps is very interesting because in the Ultraviolet Corps, it feeds off negative emotions. The Ultraviolet Corps, which was sort of led by Sinestro, was able to enter our universe because the Flash, through some crazy means, inadvertently powered up the Still Force. And I don't really know what the Still Force is, other than the fact that I think it's the opposite of the Speed Force. And he inadvertently powered up the Still Force, which opened up the portal to allow the Ultraviolet Force core to come in and infect the planet, and it basically feeds off hatred and shame. Normally, if you create a construct of willpower, the Flash can defeat you before you can initiate the thought to create that construct. But apparently when you think with hatred or shame, that's faster than even Flash can defeat you before you initiate that thought, because the implication in the pages of Justice League written by Scott Snyder is that apparently the ultraviolet core, the constructs, are even faster than the Flash. And normally the Flash is faster than thought, but not when against the ultraviolet core. I found that kind of interesting. But again, the implication being that hatred and shame and negative emotions are more powerful than love, more powerful than willpower. DC is, these are philosophical choices by DC, the writers of DC. Philosophically, DC is deliberately imbuing more power to darker forces across the DC universe, even in story scenarios and narratives, and where it doesn't really make a lot of sense. In the pages of Flash, Barry Allen and Wally West had to defeat Zoom in the Flash War, and they did so. And in order to do that, they had to. Wally West had to, every time he thought about his past, about the fact that he had kids in the pre-New 52 era, he thought about his twin children and his love Linda, who have disappeared and have been supposedly Linda's forgotten about him, and his kids have disappeared in the hyper time universe somewhere. When he thinks about his past, he has a temporal seizure, and whenever he has a temporal seizure in the Speed Force, when he was chasing Zoom, it could hurt Zoom. And so Barry encouraged him to basically think about his past, think about his connections and the connections of love he has with his family to the past. That created a temporal seizure, and that ultimately defeated Zoom. But it also inadvertently destroyed hypertime, and it destroyed the time barrier such that time travel is now impossible. It also had the effect, apparently, of releasing something called the Sage Force and the Strength Force. So we've got the Sage Force, which deals with intelligence, which has something to do with intelligence and can make people smart. Again, none of this is explained. This is why it's kind of confusing. And then there's the Strength Force, which I guess makes people strong. Again, it's not explained. It's interesting to note that in the pages of Justice League, this ultraviolet core, this invisible spectrum, was tied to 6 other forces. One of them was the Still Force, and I'm guessing the other 3 are the Sage Force and the Strength Force. And there's also something called the First Force, which was mentioned, but it's confusing there. Luthor is setting all this up in the pages of Justice League. I'm not really sure where it's going, but this is what I mean when I say that DC is really doubling down with all these hot concepts of the darker universe infecting our own. So DC's created this entire world of different types of forces that exist in the darker universe, that now that the source wall is broken down at the end of the pages of Metal, all these different kinds of forces are infiltrating the mainstream DC universe. And it's not clear exactly how they all interact. And I'm not going to go into it for the purposes of this video, other than to say that right now it's really confusing. The fact of the matter is that DC Comics are selling, Justice League is selling, and it's selling like hotcakes. And so whatever they're doing, leaving aside my confusion, obviously I think a lot of people are quite enjoying it. Otherwise it wouldn't be selling so well. So, but I just find it. I hope that some more clarity eventually comes around here, because I'm still not quite being able to put all the pieces together. Also, what is noticed here is the destruction of romance. Remember that DC Rebirth one shot where we had Aquaman and Mira and the promise that they were going to get together, and we were thinking, oh great, Superman and Lois getting together, and could we have romance returning? It's interesting because Lois and Clark, I think, are having some difficult time, at least in the early stages of Bendis' run. We look at Wally West and Linda Park in the pages of Flash. Well, Linda doesn't even remember him, and well, she knows of him now, but she doesn't remember their past or the fact that they had children together. And you look at Batman and Catwoman, the no wedding issue, and there's no guarantee we're going to get a wedding at issue 100, despite whatever promises King has made, because he's already broken promises with respect to issue 50. We look at Mr. Miracle and Big Barda. Or do they even have a romance? Maybe that entire series has just taken place in Scott Free's head. Are they even a couple? do they even have a child? The child that they have, Jacob, is he actually even their child? Is that whole thing just a figment of the anti-life taking place, creating an imaginary nightmare in Scott Free's head? It's hard to say. Again, darkness. We look at Hawkman and Hawkwoman. DC has clearly sort of rewritten the Hawkman origin, where no longer is Hawkman and Hawkwoman tied to be reincarnated lovers from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime. They seem to have separate origins now. They even have separate wings. Hawkgirl has some, Hawkwoman, Hawkgirl, Kendra Saunders has sort of metal wings made of one of the metals of the 9 metals of the DC universe, and Hawkman's wings are different, and they're really making them distinct. And so they're not really together anymore. They're their own independent persons. And I think the romance between Hawkman and Hawkwoman, between Carter Hall and Kendra Saunders, is definitely something that they're not really making much of a priority. They want to establish them as individual heroes. Aquaman and Mira. Now they finally, in this last issue of Aquaman, got together. Whether or not they're going to get married, we don't know. But it does appear that at least that was the promise out of Rebirth. But again, all these things are sort of in flux. I think it's also symbolic that the ultraviolet core appears to be the most powerful core on the emotional spectrum. So once again, anything that's negative or dark always is portrayed as more powerful. It's always more powerful. It's a very cliched thing. Whenever it's ultraviolet, it's more powerful. Whenever it's darkness, it's more powerful. Whenever it's evil, it's more powerful. The easy path of darkness is always more powerful. And then it ends by doing the flip-flop that all of a sudden something extraordinary happens, and then suddenly being good is more powerful. But apparently if you got one evil guy, he's as powerful as 10 good guys. I guess that's the superhero cliche in order to create more drama. But DC is really doubling down on that sort of cliche model, and I guess it seems to be working. I'm kind of looking forward to a little bit of some light and a little bit of more hope here, and I hope that's around the corner. I was really hoping that the Hall of Justice would hearken that, but so far we're not getting a lot of justice, but boy, we're getting a lot of Legion of Doom, aren't we? Wow. There was something that was said in the pages of Flash during the Flash War, and it was quite clear that, and I'm just going to read it here because I had to write it down, that basically the emotions of shame and hatred are uncommon emotions, and somehow constructs that are premised on shame and hatred are faster than Barry Allen. And that is to say, those thoughts are somehow faster than normal kinds of thoughts based on what he believes are common emotions like love and willpower and all this other stuff, which doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Again, and this goes back to philosophically, how is DC approaching the idea of good and evil? Philosophically, DC is approaching evil as always being more powerful, and I just find that kind of interesting and maybe a little bit wrong-headed, but I guess it creates more drama. But how can an uncommon emotion? Now, first of all, I don't think there's such thing as an uncommon emotion. I mean, hatred to me is more common than indifference, isn't it? Or love is more, is there an emotion that's more common than another emotion? I don't know if that is, but apparently, but I ask, how can an uncommon emotion be faster than a common emotion, since they all originate from the same synaptic energy? Now, I say that because that was in the pages of Flash. Now, because Flash is basically saying that if you have shame and hatred, that those uncommon emotions are so fast, and because that's what the ultraviolet core uses, is those uncommon emotions it can infect people easier that way, because these emotions are apparently uncommon, and they can bypass the synaptic energy in people's minds quicker. Again, the whole thing just seems like, why? Like, who made these rules up? That doesn't even make a lot of sense to me. But again, it's hard for me to sort of accept that completely in the premise of this story, because when you and I'm not even getting into Justice League No Justice with those different trees, and the tree of wisdom and the tree of knowledge and the tree of, and all that with those Omega giants. I didn't really understand what that was about either. I don't get it. I read the pages of Justice League Dark with Wonder Woman, the first issue there, magic is out of sync now ever since the source wall broke. So now there's now magic is corrupted, and there's a darker force of magic coming. So I mean, there's darker forces coming from everywhere, and I fear that in the DC universe, that if there's a bad guy coming everywhere all the time, there's a massive force coming in Hawkman, massive dark force that's going to destroy the world in the pages of Hawkman. There's a massive evil force that's going to destroy the world coming in Justice League Dark. There's a massive unknown force coming to destroy us, the Ultraviolet Core, in the pages of Justice League. Well, with all these massive unknown forces, which one's more important? Can we get an adventure that maybe is a little bit more smaller scale? Can we have a character-based storyline instead of a plot-centric one? That's so many plots. Is there any room for character growth here? That's what I'm wondering, because I'm not seeing a lot of character growth in Justice League. I'm not really seeing it in Flash, to be honest with you. It's the same old cliche. It's like every time I read an issue of Flash or Flash War, it's like watching the bad episode of a CW Flash, where there's this constant ridiculous diatribe about somehow, when you're running through the Speed Force, if you think about love and your family, you're somehow going to know where you're running to. If you want to know where Barry is, just think of Barry as you're running through the Speed Force, and somehow, as long as you love your family, you're going to get to where you want to go. Ridiculousness. But I don't know. Maybe I'm just cynical tonight. I don't know what it is, but it's just. I really wish the rules were better established, and they're not. And it's just all over the place. It's one giant mess of a narrative, and I really think they need to fine tune and to figure out where they're going, because it's like the DC writers, they got together at their summit, the writers' summit, and it's like they're all trying to do the same plot. And they're telling it in maybe slightly different ways, but it all seems the same to me. And I don't really know if everything. I don't really know if it's going to be worth it in the end. And I also heard news coming out of the San Diego Comic-Con, which I didn't think was good news at all, and that is that Scott Snyder is talking about another big event where everything comes together next year. Really? So now we're going to wait for the Omega Giants and Metal and more of the that's all going to come together in an event next year? So you mean it's not going to be done in the next few months? Really? I'm sorry, but I'm really looking, I want some character growth here. And this plot centric, everything is so plot centric. I was really hoping for some character development and some hope. That's what I was hoping to get out of DC Rebirth, was a return to the core concepts of the characters. But now everything is darkness and plot centric. And look, maybe I'm in the minority, or I think I'm clearly in the minority, because look, it's selling. If it sells comic books, they're going to continue to do it. But that leads into one point, and I showed the pictures of Jeff Johns and Dan Didio. Jeff Johns is no longer the chief creative officer, and Dan Didio has always had a reputation, and at least it's in the public consciousness, I think, based on the last 10 years. Dan Didio has always been more of the guy who's been more of the darker universe type of guy. He's always been wanting a little bit more drama. Dan Didio was the architect really behind Identity Crisis that Brad Meltzer wrote. And Dan Didio has bragged about Heroes in Crisis being the identity crisis of this new modern day comic book age. And clearly, I think Dan Didio is sort of leading the role here. He's leading this darkness parade, if you will. And Jeff Johns, who brought us Rebirth, it's almost like his ideas are being cast to the wayside a little bit. And he's working on Doomsday Clock, and he's very much behind in Doomsday Clock, and that's delayed. And I was really hoping Doomsday Clock was going to resolve at some point with the idea of sort of maybe ending on some spirit of hope. Doomsday Clock is somewhat of a gloomy tale about darkness infecting the DC universe. Well, guess what? It's infecting the DC universe. I mean, the Doomsday Clock. I mean, the whole idea is that with Watchmen infecting, with Dr. Manhattan being in the DC universe, with the Watchmen, with the more darker elements of the Watchmen universe infecting the DC universe, that's what made that interesting. So it made sense that maybe there was darker elements in the DC universe. But now with Metal, the DC universe is dark because of Metal. It's not dark because of the Watchmen universe anymore. So it detracts and takes away from the entire premise and the importance of the Watchmen influence in the DC universe, because the DC universe would be dark anyway, even if it wasn't for the Watchmen, wasn't for Dr. Manhattan. At least that's the way I'm looking at it. Or I don't know, is Dr. Manhattan going to play a role in maybe dealing with the Source Wall? Maybe he will. Maybe he's going to seal up that hole in the Source Wall at the end of Doomsday Clock. But I doubt it, only because I think Jeff Johns is really trying to create the Doomsday Clock to be its own self-contained story, and he doesn't want to tie it into what, quite frankly, looks like to be one giant mess of uncoordinated stories that are happening right now in the DC universe, which are just tied together by a small little sliver of this concept of, all the writers can say, oh yes, this story originated because the Source Wall broke. I don't know. Anyways, guys, where did all the light go? Where's the light? Well, the light is being shut off on purpose because a lot of people, most of us seem to be quite interested in the darkness. And as long as darkness continues to sell, the DC Universe and Dan Didio and the writers, they're going to continue to produce darker stories. And I guess so be it. I'm going to quote from the final words that were in the final pages of Justice League number 4, uttered by Gorilla Grodd. He had not seen the whole picture, because it wasn't just life. No, the universe itself had a dark soul. He was commenting about the DC Universe. That was Gorilla Grodd, a villain talking about the DC Universe. And he saw it. And what they discovered at the end of Justice League number 4 was that Lex was right. Lex Luthor, a supervillain, was right. Lex Luthor, a former good guy who we thought had been redeemed, we thought he was good, has become evil again. Kills another supervillain, Vandal Savage, with a doorknob, with the power of the Still Force, and through the power of the Still Force again, subsequent to that, with the inadvertent help of the Flash, releases the Ultraviolet Core with millions of Ultra Core members, which will presumably destroy our universe. And I don't know how they're going to get out of it, but we're going to have to wait and see. But there's a lot of darkness going around, Wow, and I'm sure I've missed something. But so much is going on, and it's all dark. And guys, if you see any brightness out there, let me know. In the meantime, I'm going to continue to enjoy the darkness the best I can and hope we get some character development. And who knows, with any luck, maybe even Mr. Miracle will end on a high note. But I ain't going to hold my breath, because I have a feeling that in this current age of Dan Didio DC Universe, that dark side truly is. Until next time, guys, thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe button. Check me out on Twitter at Metropolis40, Comic Boom, and Comic Boom out.